Hi, I'm Sarah Grace McCandless, and this is OnBrand, where we take a closer look at this growing desire for true connection between consumers and the companies that they engage with. One of the things I love about the show is I get the chance to talk to people from all different brands, from both established brands and emerging brands. And my guest today is on that emerging brand side of things, and she has really created something very different and unique, has a wonderful story to tell about how this all kind of came together. And I think that there are some really interesting things for both emerging and other established brands to learn from her process and from her story. Jala Smith-Huys is the founder and chief blanket boss of Seek Swoon. We're going to talk about what that means in a moment. She has a really interesting background, including almost 15 to 20 years working with other brands from a designing standpoint to a strategist standpoint, and really helping them to find their story as well. And Jala's here with us today to talk about her own business that she started about 4.5 years ago and how that all came to be. Jala, welcome to OnBrand.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have you and tell this story. I can't believe it's been 4.5 years, because I remember when you started this company. But before we get there, tell us a little bit more about your background. How did you kind of get involved in storytelling to begin with? And what's your kind of career history?
Yeah, so I studied journalism in school. I ended up doing a little PR after school, and then I sort of fell into graphic design work on accident. So I've spent the first 10 years of my career as a graphic designer for a local grocery store here in Portland. I was creative director there for about 9.5 years. When I was ready to move on from there, I moved on to freelance as a graphic designer. And about the same time, social media was kind of becoming a thing. Mm-hmm. And I took immediate interest. I thought Twitter was just like super interesting because it moved fast, and it was sort of an extension of the work that I was already doing with storytelling, but in a different format. So I was like paying attention to what was going on in social. And I started realizing that my graphic design clients could really use this tool. And I started pitching social media work to my graphic design clients. And that's kind of how my social media strategy consultancy started. So for the past, well, this is actually interesting that you're asking me this now, because I, on Friday, 3 days ago, closed down my consultancy to focus on Seek Swoon 100%. So up until this last Friday, which is about 11 years, I guess, I've been freelancing as a social media strategist for brands of all sizes, startups, up through brands that you and I worked on together kind of back in the day.
Yeah, that's how we met too. Yeah, I mean, it's really unique too. I mean, I consider myself a strategist and storyteller. One of the reasons I was, we're like kindred spirits. I certainly do not have the design aspect. I mean, I can draw stick figures. That's about it. I can make something bold in HTML.
Oh, I can draw stick figures too. I am not an artist in that way whatsoever.
Well, but you do have, you definitely have a design aesthetic. It is so clear in the business that you've created. I mean, so you've got this background: designer, creative director, social strategist. Before we get into Seek Swoon, tell me just again a little bit more about stories. What do you like about stories? What really draws you to creating and crafting and telling stories for others or for yourself?
I think that the most interesting thing about stories is that we can all relate to them in some way. Mm-hmm. So especially when you're doing brand work, I think the best way to connect to your client or to create interest for your client through the consumer is to find what stories they relate to. And when you are a consumer and you can relate to a brand story, it's more likely you're going to remember them. So, we've all grown up enjoying stories. We've enjoyed stories that, our parents have told, our grandparents have told. Stories are memorable, regardless of whether you lived through them or somebody else lived through them. So it makes sense that when you're working with a company and helping telling their story, that you create stories that consumers can relate to. So, I've always been interested in storytelling, whether it be through visuals or social media or whatever it is. And I think the work that I've done has always been storytelling to some degree. I started out in PR, I moved to graphic design, I moved to social media. So all of these steps that I've taken have been about storytelling in some way.
That's a great segue into getting into the Seek and Swoon story, because I love this story. I want you to tell this story. So take us back. I believe this all started to brew around 2015.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
take us through it.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to, I've always been intrigued by starting businesses, creating something from scratch. And, I'd been freelancing for 8-9 years or so. And I knew that I was ready to do something new and different. I just wasn't quite sure what it was. And I've had lots of business ideas over the years, but those ideas, even though they might have been successful, they just weren't quite the right fit for me. So I was kind of at this place where I wanted to do something new and different. I just wasn't quite sure what it was. So in 2015, my husband and I took a 2-month sabbatical to Europe, and with our kids, who were at the time 2.5 and almost 5. We were both freelancing and decided we were just going to kind of close down for a couple months and do some traveling. So we set off on this big adventure. We were in, I think, 5 different countries over the course of a couple months. And when I got back from this trip, I really was ready to pivot. And I kind of sat down, literally, and made a list of all of the things that I really was passionate about, all of the things I enjoyed, all the things that I thought I was good at. And I tried to kind of create something from this list. I was like, if I'm going to do this now, it better be intentional. It better be something that I really love. It better be something that I can do going forward. And so I just took a hard look at all of these things and tried to kind of build something from these lists. And it happened to be that, my favorite things were travel. Sustainability was something I was, really into and felt passionate about. I love home goods and things that you can collect. And I was actually putting away a baby blanket that my son had grown out of. And it was kind of like the first blanket that we bought for him. And I was putting it in storage. I was folding it up, putting it in this bin. And I was like, this is sort of interesting because this is a blank canvas for design in general, right? And I was like, maybe I want to design blankets. Even though I knew nothing about textiles, I knew nothing about the industry, I knew nothing about home decor. So I started doing some research into designing and creating knit blankets. And I became more and more intrigued by this idea. And kind of back to your storytelling question, one of the things that I knew I needed to incorporate into this business if I was going to make it happen was some sort of story. And it needed to be a story that I connected to, but also a story that consumers could connect to as well. And so I decided that I was going to design these throws inspired by places that I'd traveled. I think travel is aspirational. It's, something we all think about doing, whether it be a trip down the highway to a trip across the world, right? So I came up with this idea to design throws inspired by places that I traveled. And so that's kind of how Seek and Swoon came to be.
Gosh, I love that. There's so much there too. And I think it really hits a lot of marks for me personally because the passion is there. It's very intent. There's a lot of intent and purpose. You're marrying that experience too of taking that sabbatical, which, by the way, with the kids were 2.5 and 5 at the time. I can barely get myself through a domestic trip, let alone a European 2-month trip. So we should just stop and give you an award right now. You and your partner, an award for that. I mean, that's remarkable, but what a great experience. I mean, you're never going to forget that. Where did the name come from?
Oh, the name. Well, as a marketer and even a creative person, that naming a company or naming anything is kind of a big, strenuous, I don't know, it's a stressful process for me, especially something that I'm very close to. It took me a long time to come up with the name, and it was a lot of lists of words upon words upon words, literal words, non-literal words. I just kept going and going and going. And I landed on Seek Swoon because to me, this business and the process of traveling, the process of choosing something that you love for your home is about like looking and then just really embracing it and loving it. So that's kind of like the seeking and swooning part. So it's like, I'm seeking adventure. I'm seeking a nice piece of home decor or a cuddly blanket I'm going to add to my home. I want it to be the perfect thing. And then I'm just going to like love on it. So that's how the name came to be.
I love that. And of course, as a writer, I love the alliteration of Seek and Swoon as well. I dressed today inspired by this idea of the blanket, the throw, and the coziness for those watching versus listening in my own kind of cozy white sweater here. I did that very intentionally today.
I love it.
I would love to hear about the craftsmanship of the blankets and the throws that you do make. Can you tell us about that, including how you kind of figured out how and where to do this? And I'd love for you to touch on the materials that you use to make these blankets and throws as well.
Yeah. So they're made on large knitting machines, not by hand. There are only a handful of mills across the country that even make these types of throws anymore that are able to. And I knew that they existed because there are other companies that make similar throws. So I Google searched for days and days and days and created a list of mills. And I just emailed every single one of them and, sent them photos to find out if they were able to make my blankets. I narrowed it down to about 5. And I started testing with 2. So I sent them just a design that I created, and I had them create a blanket and ship it to me. And they weren't quite right. It wasn't what I was looking for. I had not found my mill. So I actually put the project away for, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months because I was frustrated. I mean, I'm not going to have a business if I don't have a mill that can make my throws, right? So I put it away for a while, and I was laying on the couch one day with the blanket and was like, you know what? I'm still super intrigued by this. I know that there's a solution, and that's kind of how I function in general. Like, if I can't find an answer, I know that it's out there. I just have to figure out where it is. So I picked the project back up again, and I was like, maybe I need to approach this from a different angle. If I can't find the mill that makes the blanket, maybe I should figure out what type of equipment the blanket is made on and hunt the equipment down. So I once again researched and found out there are 2 manufacturers of the machinery that make the blankets. And I emailed both of those manufacturers to see if they knew of any mills nearby that were making textiles. And through a long chain of events and talking to a lot of different people, I was introduced to a gentleman who used to sell machines for one of these companies. He's now retired and he's like a consultant. And I was introduced to this gentleman, and I wrote him, and he told me he had a mill that he thought could work with me. And he introduced me to the mill that I actually am partnering with now. And they're a small family operated mill. And they have been awesome. And so, I didn't like find them through a straight line, but because I knew that they were out there, I tried to figure out another way to track them down, which is what happened. The yarn used in my throws is recycled yarn. It's mostly recycled yarn. There's a little recycled polyester. So scraps are collected from the cutting room floors of apparel factories, and typically they're gathered up and thrown into the landfill. But in some cases, they're gathered up and broken down and refiberized back into new yarn. And that's the yarn that's used for my blankets.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Okay, I love this. You kind of reverse engineered, right, to figure out what to do. You also mentioned just now and at the beginning too, I didn't know anything about this industry. I knew I had a love for XYZ, but you didn't really know how to do it. And I love this. It's like, the University of Google, which is where my degrees are all from, pretty much.
Well, and
my medical degree is from
say,
WebMD, and my law degree is from the University of Dick Wolf, since I've seen like every episode of Law & Order. I don't think that qualifies me to go to court or be a doctor. But I love how you figured out how to do this. And I'm curious if your background prior to this as a consultant, as strategist, the creative director, and designer, I got to imagine sometimes you had projects or clients where maybe you didn't know a lot about the brand or the industry and had to do research. Is that fair to say? Do you think that influenced kind of some of your approaches to your own business?
I think so, but more or less, I feel like I've always been this person that knew that if I couldn't figure out the answer, I just needed to keep digging. I knew that somebody in a certain part of the country made these blankets. I knew that company existed. I knew there was a mill there through a bunch of research that existed, and I just had to figure out where they were. So I think more than that, it's just me being, a little bit I dig and dig until I figure out what the answer is.
I love it. I mean, you're very curious, you're hungry, and you're driven. And I think I would guess that a lot of entrepreneurs would say all necessary elements of being an entrepreneur. Were there influences though from your work as a consultant? Like, were there things that you learned from working on other brands that you either decided you did want to do with your own or didn't want to do with your own?
I think that I knew that I needed to figure out my story and tell it in a strong way. And this as being a storyteller and working in marketing for so many years, that I knew I had to create a story that people connected to. And we kind of talked about that earlier. So I knew I had to focus on that. And I knew I had to focus on creating a product that was unique, right? Like, other people are making throws like this, but how can I stand out from how can I be more than a blanket? Like, it sounds kind of silly, right? I'm selling a blanket. It's not $29.99. If I want people to pay the price point that my blanket sits at, and it's because it's made in the US, it's because it's made from certain fabrics, right? I need to figure out a way to connect to them. I need to stand out from everyone else in some way. And so storytelling was, always a big part of Seek Swoon. And I think that the brands that I remember are the ones that have stories to tell, because when you think about it, the story is actually almost more memorable than the product itself at times, right? So I focused on that and I leaned on that a lot. Yeah,
that's a great point. I think, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's also important to know what your story is versus like mimicking somebody else's. We see that a lot with other businesses, sort of like, oh, I'm going to do what they're doing versus figuring out who I am. I'm curious, you mentioned how you connect with the consumer. Talk to me a little bit about your consumer. Who was there at the beginning? How has that evolved? Who are you engaging with and interacting with?
Yeah, my customer is mostly women, women who care about design. I think women who want to support small business. I mean, because I just, I don't have any employees still. So it's just me. I'm pretty much doing everything. I've contracted out certain things, but for the most part, it's just me. And I'm the direct, I'm the person who deals with customer service. I'm the person who posts on social media. And I've gotten to know a lot of my customers personally, which has been really fun. So they are people who care about supporting small business, really. They're people who want to invest in something that has a bigger purpose or meaning, I think. I mean, I have customers who bought 5 and 6 and 7 blankets, which blows my mind still. But it's got to be more than just this is a blanket that I want to cuddle up on the couch with. There needs to be there's got to be something else that they are driven by. And I think part of it is like my connection to them. Part of it is the quality of the product, the story behind the product, all of these things. And so I think my customer cares about those things. A lot of my customers give blankets as gifts. And I think there's something to be said for like giving a gift that you can tell a story about. Like, for instance, because my blankets are inspired by places I've traveled, I have people giving them as gifts, like to someone who has been on a honeymoon someplace specific that's been, inspiring one of my throws. So it's like, here's a present, but let me tell you the story behind the present. So I think my customer are people who care about those things.
I think your customer is very reflective of what we're seeing, this shift, and it was happening before 2020. I do think there was, an acceleration over the last year because of 2020. I'd be remiss not to ask you about the impact of the last year. Now you started, I know that you've had partnerships in addition to kind of direct e-commerce as well, but what were some takeaways from this last year for you? What was the impact to your business? You had already had a few years under your belt, and then what?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I almost, I'm a little shy to answer it, and I'll tell you why. So first of all, in 2020, in the early summer, I started online marketing, advertising, and it was a really good move for me, and it really started to move things forward for me quickly. And so the pandemic had already started. And what I saw right after I launched online advertising was a big shift in my business in a positive way. So my business grew a lot in 2020. And this is why I hesitate to talk about that question, because in a time when so many businesses struggled and didn't even survive, it's a double-edged sword for me, right? Like, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have grown Seek Swoon last year. But then again, I know so many businesses didn't make it. And so, and I have a lot of small business colleagues that did great, and I know a lot that didn't. So I just want to put that out there first. So yeah, my business grew a lot in 2020. I think that what I saw was people were not able to spend celebrations with their family and friends. So they were buying gifts online and shipping. And I think that's very much why my business grew last year. They, wanted to send gifts that were meaningful, that there was purpose. So I think my throws kind of stood out in a way and kind of met the need of the consumer in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, and it's such a mindful thing for you, to the way that you framed that. I think it is mindful because a lot of businesses didn't make it. I do think that there's a difference between, we saw some things over the past year where that felt opportunistic versus, just opportunity. And when a lot of the clients that I work with both emerging and established brands. And what I saw was sort of this, there were kind of these comfort and critical needs, and some had both, and again, sometimes we saw with different businesses, none of us knew that this was going to happen. Right. But what we did know was there was a shift to customer experience being almost more important than product and price. And you said it yourself, because I feel like, people are connected with the story behind the blankets themselves as much as the physical product. And they are willing maybe to pay X or Y price point because of that story, because it's about their experience and connection with them. So that's what I love about, what you've built. And it's from a very true, authentic, and organic place. Is there anything else that you would recommend to entrepreneurs to keep in mind as they consider building their own businesses?
I think that ensuring that, we hear a lot about making sure that we start businesses that we're passionate about. And I think there's some truth to that, but I think we can build that passion on our own. So I think finding something that you enjoy and that will sustain you in terms of like keep your interest in the long run, I guess. I think that's really important. I think finding a way that you connect to your company and your product and your brand for the long haul, like I'm always going to want to travel probably. So I'm always going to have blankets to create. So my business fuels my passion and my passion fuels my business. One of the reasons I started Seek Swoon as well was because I wanted to create something that would allow us to travel more, maybe move abroad at some point. So that was always like one of the goals of creating a new company is this laddering back to my goal at the end of the day, which is to see the world and show my kids, right? So I think creating like North Star at the start of your company and making sure that you're always moving towards that North Star, I don't think you can go wrong, right? And surrounding yourself by people who will support that journey. Because even though I'm doing this by myself, my husband is so supportive. My friends and family were my first customers, talking about me and what I'm doing, like surround yourself by people who will support you and don't be afraid to ask for support and put yourself out there. Like doing podcasts is not really my comfort zone, but I know that doing things like this is good for me. It's good for my brand, but it's also, I think, inspiring for other people. And one of the reasons that I created Seek Swoon was because, or one of the things that allowed me to like pull the trigger was that I listened to other small business owners tell their stories. And I think, pulling the trigger is the absolute hardest part. I had written 20 business plans over the past 20 years, and I'd never done anything about it. And so I think my inspiration was really hearing the stories of moms in a small town who decided to just go for it, or somebody fresh out of college who didn't have much money, but who had this idea. And so, for me, hearing stories from other people who had done the same thing was super helpful. And I think that that's something that anyone who's wanting to do something like this should embrace, is listening to stories from people that are kind of coming from their same place.
I think that's fantastic advice. And it does lead me into, you kind of started to answer this, of who has inspired and influenced you. Certainly other entrepreneurs, emerging brands, small business owners, anything specific that comes to mind, or anything that you would add to that in terms of your influences and inspiration?
I mean, my mom, who is not with us anymore as of a few years ago, but my mom was a piano teacher and she did everything sort of on her own. So she always worked for herself. And I think this sort of idea that I talked about earlier of like always knowing there was a solution out there, that's how my family always was when I was a kid. It's like, if something broke, they'd fix it on their own. We didn't have people coming and like fixing things at our house unless it was like crucial, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that, I'm inspired to be a problem solver, which any business owner is absolutely a problem solver. I'm a problem solver because that's how I saw my parents operate when I was a kid. If there was a problem, they didn't call someone for help. They just figured out how to do it on their own. So I think being around problem solvers, which was my family, is a huge inspiration in being an entrepreneur, because I'm constantly having to figure out solutions, especially since I'm still operating by myself. I don't really have like someone sitting next to me. I'm like asking their opinion, right? I think I'm just programmed to like figure out solutions on my own. So I would say my family for sure.
I think that's so important. And I can definitely relate to that. Something else that you just kind of brought it back to is, you said you wear all the hats, so you do customer service, operations. I find that to be fascinating. Again, these are things I think that whatever size your company, and whether you've been here for 40 years, 70 years, or 4 days, you can learn from that. I know, the work that we do and our partnerships, we are a full provider. We are there for every stage of the customer journey, from do you know who we are, to becoming a part of us, to supporting, to advocating for us. And what you have done, because you've kind of had to do it as your own entrepreneur, kind of sole proprietor, is wear all the hats. But I think that that's going to poise you for even continued success as these different divisions grow, because it won't be siloed. It'll be very a kind of an ecosystem. And that's something I think that everybody can kind of take a page from. To kind of wrap things up, tell us what's next for Seek Swoon. What's sort of on deck for the year ahead, and where do you hope things go?
Gosh, as much as I might seem like I have everything together, I don't have a big roadmap. With that being said, I'm designing new blankets, which is always happening. I am maybe creating some new products, sort of. I'm hoping to partner with more companies on bigger projects. So I've done some hotel projects, and I would love to do more of those. And I know now with COVID and travel, like hotels aren't doing very big projects, but I am in the midst of a couple of those, and I've done some in the past. I want to continue to work with companies like that. Corporate giving, I did some. So what happened during COVID is a lot of big companies realized they weren't having Christmas parties, and they were like, what are we going to do for our employees? We want to send them something nice. And so kind of at the last minute, I got bombarded with some inquiries from bigger companies that wanted to create custom throws for their employees. And I was only able to fulfill a couple of those, actually. So I want to be prepared to fulfill more of those and be more proactive in maybe even finding some of those customers. But otherwise, I just like to start designing, or I just like to keep designing and selling blankets, really. Like, I'm pretty comfortable with how things are going. Like I said, I grew a lot last year. And if I doubled or tripled business again this year, that would be pretty great. And I would just, work with it as it came. I know I can't do this forever by myself. I'm totally aware of that. I don't think my husband would really be on board with that either. But I have brought people on to do the things that make the most sense for me. So, I have an accountant, I have digital advertising. I've recently hired some people to do email marketing for me. So as I get to the place where I can afford it and where it makes sense for me to let go, I have let go of those things little by little. And I just think I'm going to keep having to do that. I probably can't always do customer service, but that's going to be hard for me to let go of, because I feel like that's how I stay connected to my customer, really. So I think I'm just going to keep growing as much as I can and keep hopefully making the right decisions along the way. And yeah, that's the plan.
Well, you've certainly made some fantastic ones to get you where you are. And I think, you have partnered with other people to help pick up other pieces. I can certainly relate to that, because that's my whole dynamic with our brand partners. And, trust is key, because they're giving me the keys to their car. It's their baby. And we are serving as an extension of that brand. And, not everybody understands how to do that. So it sounds like you've been making fantastic choices along the way. I am blown away. Love also, I didn't really come back to it, but Chief Blanket Boss, I mean, that's might be the best title I've ever heard in my life. It's so passionate. It's so personal. It's very true to your brand. So Jala, thank you so much for your time. So much to learn from this fantastic story. I hope I get to travel with you at some point. Yes. I'm going to invite myself along. We're going to do research together.
Let's make it happen. I'm always down for, going anywhere.
And look, things are changing, things are shifting. All of that stuff will come back maybe in a little bit of a different way. But I think there's so much for others to learn from what you've done here. So thank you for sharing your insights and this inspiring story.
Thanks for having me.